You people don't own struggle, you just use it as an excuse. That's what the man from the bank told her, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, cold enough to crack something deep inside her. Maris didn't answer, not with words. But that winter, as the snow kept falling and her world kept crumbling, something happened she didn't expect. Strangers came, with boots and hammers and reasons of their own, and one by one everything began to shift. Before we dive in, let me know, what time are you listening to this and where are you? Drop a comment below, we'd love to hear from you. The bell over the door didn't ring. It groaned slow and tired, like the air that hung heavy with the smell of burnt coffee and fried eggs. Snow clung to the windows, dimming the early light. Maris wiped her hands on a towel she'd had for too long and slid a plate of pancakes toward a man hunched at the counter. "Extra syrup, Joe," she said, voice soft but steady. Joe didn't look up. He nodded once, already chewing. The heater thumped in the wall. Somewhere in the back, a radio murmured faint jazz notes, curling like steam. Maris moved without thinking, filling mugs, checking toast, folding napkins with the same motion she'd repeated every morning for years. Her gloved hands, old knit things with worn fingers, gripped the handle of the coffee pot like it was an anchor. In the corner booth, Nora sat cross-legged with her workbook open, pencil tapping against her lip. She wasn't a fidgety child. She didn't ask for much. That alone made Maris ache sometimes more than it should. Done with math, Maris asked, not turning from the griddle. "Almost," Nora said. "It's decimals again." Maris hummed, flipping a sausage link. The sizzle filled the pause. A man in a hunting jacket dropped coins on the counter and left without a word. The cold that slipped in with him didn't leave right away. Maris poured his untouched coffee down the sink, then stared at the drain a second too long. Behind the register, a small cardboard sign hung slightly crooked. It read in faded Sharpie, "Free meal. If you're short, just ask." Nora looked up from her notebook. "Mom," she asked softly, "why do you still let people have free stuff if we barely have enough?" Maris turned away, grabbed a rag, and wiped the counter, as if stalling for time. Because sometimes, she answered after a pause, the only thing someone has left is their appetite and a scrap of pride. "I don't want to take both." Nora gave a small nod. She didn't smile. Her pencil simply returned to decimals. The bell groaned again as another customer stepped through. Maris greeted the woman with a quiet smile and went back to the coffee machine. Hours on her feet had left her spine throbbing, and now her right hand stiffened with the cold. She worked her fingers, noticing the pale scar etched across her palm, an old burn nearly faded to white. Cracks lined the skin near her knuckles. She pressed both hands against her apron. Then she noticed it. By the coat rack near the door lay a single glove, dark brown leather, the kind worth more than a week's tips. It curled slightly as if waiting for its owner to return. But no one came. Later that morning, Maris brushed snow from her sleeves as she pushed open the heavy door of the county office. The air carried the scent of dry carpet and stale heat, the kind that seemed permanent in small-town buildings. Her boots left wet tracks across the tile. Snowflakes still clung to her coat, yet nobody looked up. Rows of people sat in silence, wrapped in layers of hats and heavy jackets, their faces carrying the same tired expectation. At the reception desk, a young woman asked for her name, without lifting her gaze. "Please have a seat. Mr. Frick will call you shortly." Maris nodded, though the woman was already focused back on her screen. She chose a chair by the window across from a vending machine, stocked with snacks she hadn't bought in years. Her fingers tapped lightly against the envelope in her lap, proof of payments. Copies of pay stubs, even a note from her diner manager offering to vouch for her. The door at the end of the hall opened with a faint creak. "Ms. Dalton." The voice was immediately familiar. Judson Frick stood there in a gray suit, hands tucked neatly in his pockets. His smile, if it could be called that, barely reached his eyes. She followed him into a narrow room furnished with a glass table and two chairs. Blinds hung halfway down, slicing the afternoon light into thin bars across the floor. Judson gestured toward the chair. He opened a thin folder with the ease of long practice. "I understand you're requesting a forbearance extension." 90 days, yes," she replied, placing the envelope on the table. "Just until March. I'm behind 2 months, but I've started picking up extra shifts." He kept his eyes on the papers, turning pages with a detached nod. "I've reviewed your file, Ms. Dalton. Unfortunately, the request has been denied." Her lips parted, words catching. "I've made partial payments. never more than 2 behind. At last he raised his gaze, tilting his head the way a teacher might when explaining arithmetic to a distracted child. We understand hardship, but the property has already entered repossession. A formal notice will arrive by week's end. You'll have 10 days to vacate once it does. Silence stretched. Maris held his stare across the glass table. His expression stayed the same, not cruel, not kind, only blank, as though his thoughts had already moved on to the next case. Is there really nothing else? Her voice had dropped to almost a whisper. He closed the folder with finality. Bankruptcy is always an option. It won't stop the process now. Her legs trembled, but she rose anyway, unwilling to let him see the unsteadiness. The envelope remained where it lay. It didn't matter anymore. No heads turned as she crossed the lobby. She shoved through the heavy doors and into the cold. Across the street, Nora waited on a bench with her school bag pressed to her chest. Snow clung to the edge of her knitted beanie. She lifted one hand in a small wave. Maris crossed quickly without speaking, their palms locking together mid-step and staying linked all the way to the car. That evening, the kitchen light flickered each time the heater rattled on. Maris stirred soup that had gone too thick, too salty, but at least it was hot. At the counter, Nora bent over, her homework tongue caught between her teeth as she scribbled. They left the office unspoken. Nora didn't ask. After dishes, bath time, and packing lunch, Maris opened her ledger. The pen hovered above the page like a blade over skin rent, utilities, school fees. She scratched out 2 lines, rewrote them smaller in the margin, then added borrow from Carrie before circling it twice and striking it through. She shut the notebook carefully, fingers pressing against the worn spine where it had begun to split. The night shift loomed 40 minutes away. On the road, snow thickened into slanting sheets, sliding sideways across her headlights in a dance of soft violence. The world narrowed to white walls and hissing tires. Just past the turnoff to Highway 19, she spotted him, a figure crouched beside a motorcycle, half swallowed by slush, one knee in the snow, hands fumbling with a chain or frozen tire. His black leather jacket sagged with water, shoulders slick with ice. Maris eased her foot from the gas. The car coasted forward, whispering against the road. She stayed there a moment. No other cars, no sound but the storm. Her fingers tapped the blinker lever, hesitating. He hadn't noticed her. He looked like the kind of man who'd refuse help even if he were turning blue. And still, she clicked the signal and guided the car into a snowy lot just ahead. The wind hit her first when she opened the door, followed by the bite of cold and the crunch of frozen crust beneath her boots. She stepped out. The man didn't react when she called. Snow fell heavy and slow, softening the edges of the road, muffling the world. Maris drew closer, breath sharp in the frozen air, boots grinding into the crust. "You okay?" she called again, louder this time. He finally turned. His face looked pale, beard frosted, white lips cracked. Instead of speaking, he gave a small nod toward the motorcycle, its rear tire sunk deep into slush and ice. Maris tightened her grip on the keys. The wind shoved at her coat as if urging her to keep driving. "You can't stay out here," she muttered half to herself. "You'll freeze before morning." Another beat of silence. Then she tilted her head toward the car. "Come on." The man didn't resist. He pushed himself upright slowly, bracing against the bike seat, then limped the few steps to her car and collapsed into the passenger side. Maris slammed the door behind him, brushed snow from her shoulders, and climbed in. Back at the house, the porch light flickered against the rising wind. Power had already dipped twice that week. The whole block felt one gust away from blackout. Nora peeked through the curtain as the headlights cut across the drive. Her eyes widened at the stranger trudging beside her mother, shoulders hunched, steps dragging. By the time they reached the door, she'd retreated into the hallway, voice high and tight. "Who is that?" Maris lifted a hand. "It's okay. His bike broke down. He just needs to warm up." Nora stayed crouched behind the couch, gripping the edge, as if it might float her to safety. Maris met her gaze, firm, steady. "I'm handling it." She tugged the man's coat free. The leather had stiffened with ice, and he winced as the sleeve peeled away. A damp shirt clung to his back. He smelled of exhaust, wet wool, and a faint metallic tang. "Name's Rhett," he rasped at last. "Didn't mean to scare anybody." Maris gave a brief nod. She motioned to the sofa. He dropped heavily into it, expelling a breath like he'd been holding it for hours. His hands trembled as he pulled the blanket around his shoulders. Cold slipped under the back door, making the heater thrum harder. Maris crouched at the stove, stacking kindling with muscle memory until the fire caught. "Stay put," she told him, already moving toward the kitchen. The cabinet above the sink was a graveyard of half-used bottles, cough syrup, nearly gone aspirin. Long expired a thermometer that hadn't worked since Nora was 6. At the bottom, she found a few fever-reducing tablets still sealed. She returned with the pills and a chipped mug of water. Rhett swallowed them with a shiver. "Thanks," he murmured, voice raw. Maris didn't reply. She set a pot on the burner, poured in the last of the chicken broth, and added rice with a pinch of ginger from an old tin. The motion steadied her hands even as her chest tightened. Memory pricked. Years ago, she'd stopped for a woman on the roadside, same cold, same instinct. That one had smiled too quickly, borrowed the phone, then lifted her wallet while soup simmered in the kitchen. Maris had never spoken of it, only learned to lock doors tighter and trust slower. The rice bubbled gently. Wind scraped against the windows. She ladled the soup into a bowl and set it on the table. Rhett wrapped both hands around the ceramic, soaking up the heat before taking a careful sip. He gave a grateful nod. Nora had vanished into her room. Maris's eyes lingered on the hallway before returning to the man across from her. In the glow of firelight, the exhaustion on his face showed deeper creases under his eyes, stubble heavy along his jaw. Not threatening, just worn out, like someone too tired to pretend otherwise. She lowered herself into the chair opposite, her fingers worried at a fray in her jeans. From the kitchen came the faint tick of the clock. Rhett looked at her, steady, unhurried. The fire popped once in the stove. The silence stretched, neither warm nor hostile. Simply real. Two people sitting at the edge of something neither had chosen. By morning, the sofa was empty. The pillow still held its dent, the blanket folded neatly over the armrest. No boots by the door, no jacket on the rack, only a slip of quiet that pressed against the walls. Maris stood in the kitchen doorway, coffee cooling between her palms. Only a slip of paper folded once weighted beneath the empty soup bowl. She approached without rush, picked it up. "Thank you, Rhett." That was it. No note explaining where he'd gone, no awkward apology or promise to repay. Just 2 words and a name. Her thumb traced the edge of the paper. The handwriting surprised her, tidy even. She stared a moment longer before tucking it into the corner of a drawer filled with battery packs, matchbooks, and unpaid bills. It didn't belong there. But then again, neither did he. From the hallway, Nora's bare feet slapped against the hardwood. She appeared, sleepy-eyed, hair sticking out beneath her oversized sweatshirt. "Is he gone?" she asked, rubbing one eye. Maris nodded. "Didn't want to wake us." Nora glanced from the sofa to the window. Snow still fell lighter now, blurring the horizon into a soft white haze. "He didn't even take the blanket," she whispered. Maris let out a dry chuckle. "Guess not." They dressed quickly. Nora layered clothes with practiced ease, 2 shirts, leggings, under jeans, boots she disliked, but wore without protest. Maris pulled on her coat, slipped a protein bar into her pocket, and stepped outside to start the car. Frost crusted across the windshield. She scraped at it with the edge of a gift card, muttering under her breath. Across the street, the neighbor's porch light blinked off, then on again, the power grid clinging to life. At the gas station, the pump dragged nozzle stiff in her grip. Diesel fumes hung in the air, mixing with cold metal and the faint drift of stale coffee from the open store door. Inside, Tony sat behind the counter, Santa hat still perched on his head in late January, flipping through a hunting magazine like it contained state secrets. Maris stepped in for a refill, lingering near the register. "Any word on the roads?" she asked. Tony looked up. "County plows ain't touched the back roads yet. Gonna be a while. Heard the high school might shut down the rest of the week." She blew out a breath through her nose. "That's a long stretch. Could be longer if the next storm hits, like they're saying." He gestured toward the radio behind him, where a crackling voice warned of falling temperatures and another front moving in. "Phone's been ringing all morning." "You got heatwood stove," she answered. "Holding steady." "Good," he said, studying her more closely. "You look worn down, Maris." She forced a small smile. "Must be the lighting." Back in the car, the heater finally pushed warm air. Nora scribbled in her notebook, mouth set in quiet concentration. Maris took a sip, then reached into the glove box for her ledger. She unfastened the clasp and the bills tumbled open, like dominoes, rent, utilities, a curt notice from the credit union. She stared at the numbers as if sheer will could make them change. The phone buzzed. Principal Holloway's name lit the screen. Maris let it ring twice before answering. Hi, Ms. Dalton. Just a heads up, the school board voted this morning. With road conditions and staffing shortages, classes are canceled for at least 3 days. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel. We'll post assignments online for older students, the voice added. But we know everyone's just doing their best. Maris murmured thanks, ended the call, and dropped the phone into the console tray. Silence filled the car. Nora kept her eyes on her notebook. Without looking up, she asked, Are you going to stay home with me? Maris didn't reply. She pressed her hand to her forehead, gaze locked on the snowy road ahead. The ledger pages shifted across her lap as the heater rattled harder against the cold. The knock came hard and fast, shattering the morning stillness. Maris let the dish rag fall to the counter and turned toward the door. Through the frosted pane, she caught a silhouette square shoulders coat too clean to belong to anyone local. She didn't need to see the face. Opening the door halfway confirmed what she already knew. Judson Frick stood on the porch, scarf arranged with care leather gloves, pristine, despite the snow curling around his shoes. In one hand, he carried a sleek black folder. In the other, a brand of politeness honed sharp with condescension. Good morning, Ms. Dalton, he said as if offering cookies. Maris stayed silent, breath fogging the air between them. He extended the folder. This is your final notice of foreclosure. As of this morning, the property is officially in repossession. You are expected to vacate by the 12th. That gives you, he flipped a page, feigning thought, 7 days. She refused to take it. You came all the way out here to hand me that I believe in clarity. Some things shouldn't be left to email. Her jaw clenched. Cold gnawed through her sleeves. I've got a kid, she said. I'm not running from anything. I just need time. Judson's smile never reached his eyes. There are shelters, churches with donation programs. You could try applying for one of the emergency grants, though they disappear fast. From the window, a curtain twitched. Maris didn't turn, but she caught it, the flicker of someone watching, then retreating. Of course, Judson continued, if you can prove increased income within the next few days. Don't she cut in sharp. Don't stand there and act like this is about laziness or bad planning. I'm working 2 jobs. I don't take vacations. I haven't had a sick day in 4 years. He lifted both palms, the hollow gesture of sympathy. I'm only delivering paperwork, Ms. Dalton. You're enjoying it. He gave a faint huff, almost a laugh. I assure you there's no pleasure in this. Behind her, Nora appeared barefoot, clutching a stuffed rabbit, eyes darting between them. Maris guided her back, gently lowering her voice. It's fine, baby. Wait in the kitchen. But the damage was done. Her daughter had heard enough. Judson tucked the folder beneath his arm and stepped back. 7 days, he repeated. Have a good morning. Maris slammed the door. The frame rattled. In the kitchen, Nora traced circles into the table with one finger. Maris moved quickly, quicker than needed, pulled open a drawer and snatched the envelope from yesterday's mail. The envelope held more notices: overdue, final warning, intent to seize. She tore one in half, then, another, hands shaking. A third sheet slipped from her grip and drifted to the floor like an accusation. Behind her, something clattered. A plate slid from the drying rack, slick with soap shattering on the linoleum. Maris froze, staring at the pieces. Her shoulders heaved once, then again, breath uneven. I'm doing everything right, she whispered. The words echoed hollow, stripped of truth. She grabbed a glass and hurled it at the sink. It burst against the metal shards, scattering into the basin, catching slivers of morning light. Nora flinched but stayed silent. Maris buried her face in her hands. A sound tore loose, half sob, half growl, years of restraint worn to threads. She crouched to gather the broken plate. A shard cut her thumb, but she didn't react. Nora slid off the chair and moved closer. Mom Maris blinked, hands pausing mid-motion. The child said nothing more, only clutched the rabbit tighter and waited. Maris wiped her thumb on her jeans, then sat back on her heels. Blood welled along the cut, dull against her skin. She stared at it, vacant. Across the floor lay the folder Judson had left, her name stamped in red, a deadline glaring beneath it. The sun dipped behind the ridge, leaving the farmhouse wrapped in bruised orange and violet. The wind had eased, but cold still pressed through the seams. At the sink, Maris twisted her wedding ring between her fingers. She hadn't worn it in years yet. Her hands remembered the motion. Nora sat at the table, looping a crayon across the corner of a grocery list, humming off key until a knock rattled the back door. Both of them froze. A second knock came softer. Nora glanced at her mother. Maris dried her hands on a towel, shoulders tightening. No one ever used that entrance without warning. She started forward, boots heavy on the worn boards, but Nora darted ahead and pulled it open a crack. Rhett stood on the porch, coat zipped, hands buried in his pockets, beard catching the last scraps of daylight. His expression wasn't sheepish or proud, just quiet. "Evening," he said, voice rougher than she remembered. "Think this belongs to you." In his hand sat her wallet, worn, half-zipped, a receipt sticking out like a flag. Maris blinked. She hadn't even realized it was gone. "Found it near the pump at Blue Pine," he explained. "Figured you'd want it back before someone else did." She reached forward. Her fingers brushed his glove-cold leather against calloused skin. Everything was still there, cash, coupons, scraps of paper. Nothing touched. "You didn't have to come this far," she murmured. He shrugged lightly. Didn't feel right not to. From behind, Nora leaned to study him. "Are you still sick?" Rhett managed a faint smile. "Better now. Thanks to the soup." Her gaze dropped to the duffel bag on his shoulder. "You live out of that," Nora. Maris warned, but Rhett raised a hand. "It's all right." "Yeah, sometimes. Not always. Don't you have a house?" His weight shifted. "Used to. Life got strange." Nora tilted her head. "My mom says life's like that." A low, genuine chuckle slipped from him. "Your mom sounds smart." Maris hadn't moved. She held the wallet tight, its weight suddenly foreign. He didn't fill the space with demands or apologies, and that absence unsettled her more than any plea would have. Her eyes narrowed. "Why bother coming back? You could have mailed it." "I could have," he agreed. "But you opened your door to a stranger. That deserved respect." A gust pushed past him, snow lifting in small spirals. Nora, without thinking, stepped aside and widened the opening. "You want something to eat?" she asked. He hesitated. "I'd hate to intrude." "You're already here," the girl replied simply. Maris and Rhett locked eyes. Her stomach twisted, not fear, not trust, but the hollow outline left behind by years of fear. "You just passing through again?" she asked. "Not sure. Didn't plan that far." Her gaze flicked to Nora, standing barefoot on cold-tiled cheeks, pink from the fire. No fear there, only curiosity. Maris drew back and opened the door fully. No invitation, no explanation, only space. Rhett understood. He stepped in carefully, brushing snow from his sleeves, mindful not to trail slush. The latch clicked shut behind him, sealing in wood smoke and stillness. Maris stirred the pot on the stove, spoon clinking against the side. Rhett lingered by the rack, awkward, unsure where to land. Nora tugged him toward the table. "We've got crackers too," she said. Maris didn't turn, but her voice carried. "They're stale." Nora giggled. Rhett smiled, lowering his duffel to the floor as he settled into a chair. The kettle hissed. Maris filled 3 chipped mugs, steam rising from the tea leaves. She offered one across the table. No questions, no demands. Not yet. The ceramic warmed his fingers. Silence stretched again, but softer this time. Not brittle. A chair scraped as Maris sat opposite him, her gaze steady. No one spoke, but something had shifted. Steam curled up from the stew pot in lazy spirals, carrying garlic potatoes and slow-cooked meat through the kitchen. The warmth in the room came not only from the stove, but from something gentler settling between them. Rhett crouched beneath the sink, flashlight wedged in the crook of his neck, muttering while tightening the brass fittings that had dripped since Thanksgiving. Maris sat at the table, arms folded, her coffee cooling. "Do you usually fix things barefoot?" she asked, nodding toward his boots by the back door. Rhett grinned without glancing up. "Only when I'm in polite company." Nora giggled from the countertop. "He means us." That's so. Maris arched a brow. "I mean," Rhett said, giving the last connector a twist, "you've got manners and stew. That's more than I've had in months." He rose, wiped his hands on a dish towel, and tested the faucet. No drip, no hiss. Maris leaned over to check. "Huh. You might have just saved me $50 and my sanity." "I'll take half the stew as payment," he said, nodding toward the bubbling pot. They gathered at the small round table. No formal setting, just bowls passed, spoons clinking, elbows resting on wood. Rhett ate like someone who hadn't had a true meal in weeks, grateful, never greedy. Nora peppered him with questions between bites of bread. Did you ever ride a camel? Nope. But I once fell asleep on a donkey. Woke up 2 miles from camp. Did you ever shoot a bazooka? Only in video games. What's the scariest thing you've ever seen? Maris parted her lips to interrupt, but Rhett answered first. Someone giving up, he said gently, then smiled. But don't worry, I'm not planning to. The talk wandered after that whether cartoons, whether canned peaches beat fresh. Maris said little, letting herself simply listen. The weight in her shoulders eased, and for the first time in months, the kitchen didn't echo with absence. Later, the three stepped outside with shovels. The storm had passed, leaving a hush so complete it swallowed every sound but their breath and boots. Nora bundled in 2 scarves, carved trails like a determined explorer. Rhett worked the back steps steady and sure. Maris cleared a path to the shed, each scoop of snow steadying her pulse. I forgot how quiet it gets after a storm, she murmured. Rhett straightened, shovel braced against the ground. Feels like the world's holding its breath. The air had gone still. Even the pines seemed to listen. When the work was done, Nora flopped onto the ground, sweeping her arms into the shape of an angel. Maris lowered herself to the porch steps, breath misting in the cold. Rhett leaned against the railing, arms folded across his chest. You ever think about leaving here? He asked. Her eyes stayed on the dark tree line. Every morning, every night. But she gave a small shrug. Where would I go? This house is what I've got. My mom left it to me when I had nothing. I keep hoping I'll make it count. Rhett offered no reply, but the pause between them held steady, not strained. Nora tugged off her glove and pointed skyward at the first stars above the trees. That one's my favorite. Which one? Rhett squinted. The one that looks like it's blinking. Maris smiled faintly. She means the one by the satellite tower. It's not a star. Nora huffed. It blinks like a star. They lingered like that, not needing more. Then came the sound, mechanical, low rising. From the house, the old fax machine sputtered to life. It hadn't stirred in weeks. Maris stood, dread already tightening her chest. The others trailed her in. The machine choked out paper in jerky bursts. She snatched the first page. Final notice account, delinquency escalation. Her stomach knotted. Another sheet rolled out. Notice of potential foreclosure. She read it twice as though the words might soften. They didn't. A third page followed, ink half faded. Behind her, Nora whispered, Is it bad? Maris said nothing. The machine whirred again, spitting out more paper, each grind of its gears louder than the last. The wind clawed at the eaves, howling down the chimney with the fury of something ancient. Lights flickered, then dimmed to a weak amber. Maris tugged her scarf tighter and nudged the space heater with her foot, coaxing out a thin sigh of warmth. On the couch, Nora was already asleep, curled beneath 2 blankets, her face half buried in a pillow. A flashlight glowed faintly in her hand, shadows dancing across the floorboards. A tattered picture book rested against her chest, dragons and daughters. Maris reached to slide it away, but stopped when she caught movement. Rhett stood in the kitchen doorway, holding a sheet of paper, creased familiar, too white under the weak light. She froze. I didn't mean to pry, he said, lifting the envelope slightly. It was just... there. Her voice stayed level. You read it. He didn't answer, but his silence was enough. Maris inhaled through her nose, slow, deliberate. I meant to tell you. When Rhett asked, his tone steady, but the kind of steady that cracks just before it breaks. After the locks changed, after you and Nora disappeared without a word, I wasn't planning to vanish, she replied quickly, then gave a short, hollow laugh. Scratch that. Maybe I was. He stepped closer, boots soft on the worn floor. 10 days, Maris. I know. Why didn't you say anything? She reached for the letter, but he didn't let go. Her fingers brushed his, chilled from the draft sneaking through the window seams. What difference would it have made, she asked. You'd offer help, I'd refuse, we'd argue, and we'd end up here anyway. Me with a foreclosure notice and you wondering what kind of mess you walked into. It's not about the mess. Yes, it is, she snapped sharper than intended. Always the mess. My bills. My busted plumbing. My car that won't last the winter. My kid who deserves more than watching her mother scrape coins out of the glove box for discount soup. Rhett stayed still, and that stillness only sharpened her anger. I've done the charity dance, she pushed on, voice rough. I've been the grateful case. I've swallowed pride so many times I don't even taste it anymore. And every hand that reaches out either comes with strings or disappears when things get hard. His jaw flexed. Is that what you think I am? I think you're temporary. The words landed. His shoulders tightened barely, but it was enough. She regretted it instantly, yet couldn't take it back. Rhett lowered his eyes to the notice, then folded it carefully and set it on the counter. You think letting someone in is weakness? I think leaning on someone who won't stay is dangerous. The heater groaned, then coughed and shut off with a final click. Cold crept beneath the doors. Lights blinked twice before settling into a dim orange flicker. Maris braced herself against the table palms, pressing the edge like an anchor. You know what scares me most, she whispered. Not losing the house. Not even starting over. It's Nora looking at me and realizing I can't keep her safe. Rhett's gaze slid toward the couch, where the child's breathing rose and fell steady under the blankets. I don't want her to grow up thinking the world is nothing but broken promises, Maris continued. If that means keeping her world small and predictable, then so be it. He gave a single nod. Got it. No argument, no persuasion. He simply turned, walked past the couch, and opened the back door. The wind caught it instantly, flinging it wide with a groan. Snow swept in, stinging and fine. Maris didn't move to stop him. She stood as the cold poured through the room and watched him step barefoot into the yard jacket, open at the collar breath, billowing in the freezing dark. He walked a few paces, stopped beneath the old maple, and lifted his head to the sky. No speech, no gesture. Just a man alone in the storm, breathing through what had unraveled between them. She stared after him until the kettle hissed behind her, breaking the moment. Still she didn't move. The shed door stuck at the bottom. Maris leaned her shoulder into it until the warped wood gave way with a groan. Dust rose with the burst of cold air, tinged with rust and dry pine. The place hadn't been touched in months, maybe longer. Boxes stood stacked in corners like relics of another life. Rhett waited just behind her, silent. She wasn't sure why she had brought him here. Maybe to distract herself from what had unraveled in the house, or to prove she still held something of the past worth keeping. She tugged the chain of the bare bulb overhead. It flickered, then spread a weak yellow glow across the cluttered shelves. Fishing rods leaned against a broken rocker. An oil lantern hung from a nail. On a table near the wall rested a wooden chest, its brass latch dulled with time. Maris crossed the room and flipped it open. Within lay faded letters, a dog tag and a photograph, her father in uniform grin, crooked a hand braced on the shoulder of a younger soldier. She hadn't touched these keepsakes in years. Objects never dulled the ache of loss. Rhett stepped closer. His breath hitched. That's him, he murmured. Her eyes flicked to him. My dad. He nodded, gaze fixed on the picture. Ray Tolliver, staff sergeant, pulled me out of a ravine near Kandahar when I was 19. We thought he was half ghost the way he moved. My whole leg was torn up. Medics said I'd have bled out if he hadn't dragged me 6 miles to evac. Maris studied the image again, seeing it new. He never told me. Didn't seem like the kind of man who would. Rhett reached out but stopped short. I recognized you. That photo on your mantle, the two of you together. You've got his eyes. Her chest tightened. Not fear, but something older, softer, harder to bear. So all this time, you remembered him, her voice cracked. I wasn't certain until that night on your couch. But yeah, I never forgot his face. Or his voice. He said, you don't get to die on my shift, son. Then he laughed like it was the dumbest thing he'd ever had to say. Her hand hovered above the dog tag. You never mentioned it. You didn't look like someone who wanted stories. You looked like someone surviving. A sharp laugh broke from her, tumbling into a sob. She turned toward the wall, pressing her palm against a nail head, as though it could hold her upright. Tears came hard like they had waited too long. Not when the foreclosure letter arrived. Not when Judson stood on her porch. Not when the heater failed or when she scraped frost off her windows. But here in this shed, with dust swirling in the weak light, the past pressed too close. The present split wide open and she couldn't hold it. I can't even keep the house, she gasped. The one thing he left me and I'm losing it. Losing everything. Rhett didn't reach for her. No hand on her shoulder, no empty assurance. He just stood solid like the man she remembered in stories. The bulb swung slightly in the draft. Dust drifted through the glow. She scrubbed her sleeve across her face. Her voice came smaller. I've tried so hard. Every bill, every packed lunch, every bedtime story, and it's never enough. Rhett moved to the other side of the chest and studied the letters. His expression shifted, not pity, but something quieter. Respect. He wrote me once, Rhett said, after I got home. Sent a postcard with a mountain sketch. Wrote, if you're ever near Wyoming, stop in for real coffee. I kept it for years. Never thought I'd actually end up here. Her breath escaped brittle. You think he'd be proud of me, she whispered. I don't think he'd care about the mortgage. Her throat squeezed tight. Rhett met her eyes. But I think he'd be proud that you still open the door for people in the middle of a snowstorm, even when you're drowning yourself. Her head dipped in a faint nod, chest still shaking from what had broken loose. He didn't try to fix her. He simply stayed. The bulb buzzed louder. From somewhere beyond the walls, ice crashed off the garage roof, shattering against the ground. Neither of them flinched. Maris leaned against the cold frame of her truck, eyes tracing the curve of the elementary school roofline as children spilled out in mismatched coats and damp boots. The late winter air carried a wet chill, the scent of melting ice and asphalt clinging to everything. Across the lot, a bus wheezed to a stop, its brakes groaning under strain. Nora, as always, was slow to emerge, methodical with her zipper, careful with her books. That stubbornness used to make Maris smile. Today it just made her chest ache. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She let it ring twice before pressing accept. Is this Maris Tolliver? A clipped male voice asked. Yes. This is Officer Henderson with the County Enforcement Office. I'm calling to inform you that the final order of eviction has been approved. Execution is scheduled for 9 days from today. A formal copy will arrive by morning. If you have any questions, she ended the call. The air thickened around her, heavy and dense. The playground blurred. Voices nearby thinned to static. Her grip tightened on the steering wheel, though she wasn't even in the truck. When Nora tapped the glass, it took her a beat too long to react. Maris opened the door. Hey, Bug, you okay? Nora asked, slipping her backpack down. Maris nodded. A lie, just tired. They drove home beneath a pale sky, smeared with lavender and ash, the kind of color that promised another cold front. Bare trees lined the road like ribs, and Maris kept her eyes forward, ignoring the knot rising in her throat. At the house, the porch light sputtered. A lamp flared once, then dimmed to a weak glow. Another buzzed low before guttering. She left them as they were. She said nothing. She kept her coat on. She sank onto the couch as though her bones had softened, as if moving too quickly might cause the whole structure of her life to collapse. The letter had come. The date was final. Every patch and plan had failed. Nora padded back from the kitchen with 2 bowls canned soup, steaming with a few saltines on the side. She set one on the table and settled cross-legged on the floor, sipping in silence. The lamp flickered again. Wind clawed at the siding. I don't want to leave this house, she said softly, still looking at her bowl. Maris studied her hands. Calloused, dry, always busy except now. Even when it leaks, Nora continued, even when the heater makes those noises. I like it here, I know, Maris whispered. It smells like you. And cocoa. And cinnamon sometimes. Maris turned away, pressing her sleeve to her cheek as though cloth could stop the tears rising. Her throat ached from holding them back too long. Can we stay? Silence pressed close. She rose abruptly, soup untouched footsteps loud across the kitchen. She leaned into the counter, chest heaving. All the long nights, all the double shifts, all the unopened envelopes and scraped pennies, the boots worn thin rather than replaced. None of it had been enough. A sound slipped from her half-sob, half-breath. She steadied herself against the fridge. Her phone lay on the counter. One number still hovered in recent calls. She tapped it. It rang once, then twice. On the third, he answered. Maris skipped hello. Her voice came low, flat, frayed. If you're still nearby, I need help. Silence stretched. Then Rhett's reply. Where are you? She didn't answer right away. She only let the air sink into her lungs, heavy as stone. Her hands shook as she lowered the phone. Instead of returning to the living room, she drifted to the back door and cracked it open. Snow curled in eddies over the garden beds, now shapeless mounds. Her father had once called that patch his retirement plan, a place for tomatoes and dignity. Now it was only white quiet waiting. Nora appeared behind her. Maris turned. "You want cocoa?" The girl nodded. Maris stepped aside, letting her pass, then lingered longer in the doorway, wind stinging her face. Somehow the cold felt truer than pretending. Maris woke to the crunch of gravel. Not the soft tread of a delivery van, but heavier, methodical, unhurried, too certain to be kind. She pulled her coat around her shoulders and crossed the creaky floor to the window. Two county trucks idled at the edge of her lot. A third vehicle waited further back, sleek, black, sterile. Its windows reflected nothing but the flat, colorless sky. She didn't need to see the driver to know Judson Frick had come. She pushed the door open, but stayed behind the screen. Cold air seeped through the gap, biting her hands. The lawn had turned to slush in patches, earth bleeding where snow had given way. The driveway ran with brown streaks, gravel slick beneath melting frost. Three men in bright vests unloaded their gear tripods, markers measuring wheels without sparing her a glance. "Morning, ma'am," one muttered, his voice clipped. Maris gave no reply. Behind the tinted glass, Judson sat motionless, watching like a man appraising livestock, impassive, calculating. The screen door creaked. Nora stepped out in pajamas, hair tangled from sleep cheeks, flushed with warmth already fading. "Are they taking our house?" she whispered. Maris opened her mouth, but words stuck fast. Her breath clouded the air. Nora wrapped small arms around her waist. "We don't have to go yet." Right across the street, the Dentons lingered at their curtain, half hidden. A woman 2 doors down folded her arms on her porch, but didn't wave. A survey stake slammed into the ground with a sharp crack, the sound carrying like a hammer against bone. Another worker stretched a tape and called out numbers. Maris felt rooted to the porch, a statue carved from exhaustion and rusted pride. Then an engine sounded low, at first rising. One motorcycle rounded the corner. Then two. Then a line. Within minutes, a dozen lined the curb across from the trucks. No roaring, no theatrics, just presence. At the front, Rhett dismounted, helmet tucked under one arm, eyes unreadable. He climbed the steps slowly, boots marking the damp snow. "You all right?" he asked. Maris gave a single nod, lips pressed tight. More bikes arrived, 18, 20, maybe more. Riders dismounted quietly. Some leaned on handlebars, others shouldered tools. One balanced a folded ladder with ease. Judson's car window slid halfway down. He scanned the gathering, his expression tightening. Another rider approached the porch. Broad-shouldered, gray-bearded jacket stretched to fit his frame. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I'm Bill. Rhett filled us in. Thought you might need company today." Maris looked at him as though waking from a dream. Nora still clung close. Bill nodded toward the survey crew. "You want us to back off, we will. But if not, we stand with you." She glanced at the men pacing, her lawn boots, chewing up mud neighbors' curtains, twitching with unasked questions. Her chest felt hollow, but something deeper pushed upward, filling the space. "Yes," she said. Bill tipped his head, and the word carried down the line like wind through dry grass. A tall rider walked to the nearest stake and pressed his boot against it. The wood split with a crack. He didn't look back. Another wheeled over a portable generator. One unstrapped a blue tarp. Someone else hoisted a crate of bulbs. Judson's door edged open, then shut again. His face showed a flicker, confusion, anger, maybe fear. No one addressed him. Rhett stayed close at Maris's side, posture loose yet alert. "We're not here to stir trouble," he said, "just to keep you standing." Maris's throat burned. She still couldn't answer. Instead, she watched as a rider on the porch replaced the broken light above the door. Two more straightened the sagging gutter. Another handed Nora a thermos. She blinked at him, then sipped without hesitation as though it were natural. The wind had shifted. Still cold, but it no longer drove against her spine. The first thing Maris noticed was the sound. Not the rattle of wind at the storm door or the groan of branches under melting snow, but a low growl steady and foreign to the weather. She stepped onto the porch, boots crunching against refrozen crust. The wind tugged her coat as she looked toward the bend in the road leading into town. Headlights, dozens of them. Engines pulsed in rhythm, louder with every breath. By the time the first motorcycle swung into view, her chest had gone tight. Then came another. Then a stream chrome flashing in pale daylight tires, spitting slush leather, and steel flowing together like a dark current. People stepped onto their porches. Curtains twitched. One of her neighbors, Mr. Hanley, dropped the snow shovel in his hands. A voice behind her, Nora's, soft and uncertain. "Are they coming here?" Maris didn't answer. Her hand gripped the railing. The throb of engines filled her bones now, like thunder that wouldn't break. Her mind reeled back to warnings, to Judson's threats, to every cold encounter that left her feeling smaller than she was. But this was not what she expected. The bike slowed as they neared the property line. No screeching stops, no aggressive revving, just a rolling, deliberate arrival. The lead rider stopped at the edge of her driveway. Behind him, rows of headlights idled like quiet watchmen. Rhett cut the engine and swung his leg over the seat. His boots sank into the soft, wet soil, leaving deep impressions. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He simply said, "We're not here to take anything." A few of the other bikers began dismounting. Some looked weathered, like red, older, sun-darkened skin hands that had clearly held more than handlebars. Others were younger, quiet, alert. Rhett glanced at the broken section of her front fence, then looked back at her. "Figured we could start there." Maris opened her mouth to speak, but the words stuck. Her hands tightened at her sides. She heard one of the neighbors mutter something, followed by a screen door slamming shut. A black SUV rolled to a stop just beyond the last motorcycle. Its tinted windows gave nothing away, but the license plate told her everything: county vehicle. The driver's door opened. Judson Frick stepped out, flanked by a man in a deputy's uniform. He didn't move fast, didn't raise his voice, just stood there, taking in the scene like a man cataloging threats. "I don't know what you think this is," he called out, his voice slicing through the cold, "but this is still county property, and you're trespassing." Rhett didn't turn. He kept his gaze on the fence. "Nobody's trespassing," he said quietly. "We're standing on land that's not under possession yet." Judson took a step forward, then stopped. He looked at the crowd, at the jackets, the patches, the arms crossed over broad chest. He weighed the optics. "You're making this worse for her," Judson said, raising his chin toward Maris. "She doesn't owe you silence," Rhett replied, still not looking at him. "Or surrender." A woman stepped from the group, dark braid tucked under a knit cap, toolbox in hand. She approached the damaged post and began prying loose the splintered wood. Another man followed with fresh lumber. Hammers rang out. Someone fired up a portable drill. Snow crunched under boots. Maris blinked. She could hardly believe it. They weren't here to fight. They weren't even here for her, not really. They were here for something older, deeper, a promise. She glanced toward Judson, whose jaw twitched. His eyes swept the scene once more, but the deputy said nothing, hands relaxed by his belt. Judson finally turned back toward his SUV. "Don't think this changes a damn thing," he muttered. Rhett let him go without a word. Maris stood frozen on the porch, Nora's small fingers woven through hers. The girl whispered, "They're fixing the fence." No words came. Her body answered, instead legs carrying her down the steps across the soggy yard to where a woman with a braid passed her a nail gun without question. She gripped it. No one spoke further. They just worked beneath a sky mottled with gray while smoke drifted from a far field where someone burned away dead branches. Chapter 13. A voice that doesn't need to shout. The glass doors of the bank opened with their usual hiss, but this time Maris didn't falter. Her boots clicked across polished tile, each step deliberate. She wore her one good coat navy wool button, missing at the hem, and held a folder flat against her chest. A man followed close behind, broad-shouldered beard, grizzled with aged leather jacket bare of insignia. His name was Harlan Reeves, once a military legal officer, now a man who knew exactly where to press without drawing blood. The receptionist blinked at them. "Can I help you? We have an appointment with Mr. Frick." Harlan said, calm, almost pleasant. She hesitated, then lifted the phone. Maris remained quiet, scanning the waiting room. Overlit, sterile, lined with fake plants curling at the edges. The air smelled faintly of toner and lemon cleaner. Minutes passed. Then the frosted door at the end of the hall cracked open. Judson Frick appeared, expression clipped. He didn't greet them. "This way," he said. They followed. His office hadn't changed since her last visit, degrees in heavy frames, a silver pen holder polished to a shine, the atmosphere thick with practiced superiority. Judson gestured to the chairs. "Have a seat." Harlan stayed standing, eyes drifting over the stack of folders on the desk. Maris sat clutching her own. Judson folded his arms. I don't know what this is supposed to be. You've had your notice. Deadline's passed. I'd like to review the foreclosure documentation, Maris said evenly. His brows lifted. You already have the final statement. We want the original file, Harlan interjected. Loan restructuring dates, signature verification, the transfer form from February 6th. For the first time, Judson faltered. He blinked, then steadied. Why? There are irregularities, Harlan replied, still pleasant. Redactions where none should exist, stamp codes that don't match, and the transfer went through during a declared weather emergency, violating statute 12.418C on due process access. Maris held Judson's gaze. A fine crack showed in his confidence. I don't see how he started. You will, Harlan, cut in. We'll be filing for a full administrative audit. Until then, this property remains under freeze. No action can move forward. Judson yanked open a drawer, rifling papers with unnecessary force. You're bluffing. The pre-filing notice is already in motion, Harlan said. Expect the paperwork this afternoon. The hum of the air conditioner filled the pause that followed. Judson leaned back, jaw hard. This won't last. You're only buying time. Maybe Maris said, her voice steady, or maybe not. She rose. Harlan did the same. The folder she carried stayed closed, never needed. Judson didn't move. He stayed behind the desk as if it were armor. At the door, Maris paused with her hand on the knob. She looked back, not with defiance, not with triumph, just clarity. You don't scare me anymore, she said. Then she stepped out. The cold bit her cheeks, but she drew in a deep breath and let it settle. Harlan followed silently, nodding once on the sidewalk. You did good, he said. Maris glanced at him. You didn't have to come. No, he agreed. But Red asked, and some debts don't show up on paper. Traffic rolled past in uneven waves. The light overhead blinked yellow as they crossed. The bank loomed behind them, a frozen monument she never turned to face again. Back in her truck, she sat for a long moment before starting the engine. Her hands trembled, not from fear, not anymore, from release. On the dashboard, a small slip of paper Nora had drawn fluttered in the vent's breeze. 3 stick figures, herself, her mom, and a man with oversized boots and a wide grin. Maris felt her own mouth curve before she noticed. The engine caught tires crunching over grit as she pulled away. Back in the bank, Judson stared at the empty chairs, fingers drumming against the desk, a fissure spreading through his composure. The hammer struck wood with a clear ringing note. Not frantic, not desperate. Just steady work shared by many hands. Sunlight poured across the yard like a long-absent guest. It spilled over the half-mended fence and warmed the shingles on the house new rows, gleaming like copper coins. On the porch, Maris held a mug, not for heat but for the steady weight anchoring her fingers. A ladder leaned along the eaves. Leon balanced with surprising grace as he measured a replacement beam, while another man braced the base, cracking a joke about insurance. Laughter carried from the driveway, quick and bright. In the grass, Nora bent over a card purple marker, squeaking as she pressed too hard. Her tongue poked out in concentration, brows furrowed the way her father's used to when wrestling the thermostat. Maris didn't call her in. She let her stay. On the dining table, the fax machine sat silent. The last page it had printed legal confirmation of ownership reinstated lay face-up stamped and signed. Maris remembered watching Judson's pen tremble slightly at the bottom, his jaw tight as if biting metal. Harlan had stood beside her when she signed. This is yours now, he'd said, tapping the paper. Not borrowed, not loaned. Yours. And now here they were, still standing. She stepped from the porch, boots sinking into damp soil. Snow clung in the shaded corners, but the light had shifted, the kind that hinted at thaw. By the side yard, Rhett crouched near the main pipe, tightening a seal. He looked up as she neared, brushing dirt from his jeans. Sweat lined his temple despite the chill. Leak should be gone, he said. Might rattle a little, but it'll hold. Maris nodded. Thank you. His gaze lingered, quiet, unreadable. I'm not the only one who needed mending. Behind them, a cheer went up. The crew on the ladder had finished securing the last beam. Leon lifted his fist like a boxer claiming a round. A nail gun snapped once, crisp and final. Maris sipped her coffee. Cold now, but she didn't mind. Nora bounded toward her, clutching the card. Don't read it yet, she blurted, cheeks pink. It's for later. All right, Maris said, hiding a smile. I'll wait. The girl darted back, slipping on a patch of slush before catching herself and laughing. Rhett watched her steady, then lowered his eyes to his boots. She's strong, he murmured. She had to be, Maris answered. No argument followed. They stood in the lull between tasks, that quiet pocket that once made Maris brace for disappointment. Now it simply left space in the day. From the porch, a biker called, "You want us on the back fence next?" Maris turned, catching his grin. "Only if you plan on eating lunch here." He saluted. We never turned down chili. Tools shifted. Boards scraped across the yard. The air filled with the sharp, comforting scent of sawdust. From the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed like it finally had reason. Maris glanced at the window, sunlight flashing against the newly patched shingles. The same roof she'd imagined losing, the same wall she'd once prepared to abandon, still hers. Rhett adjusted the wrench in his back pocket. "You ever gonna read that card?" Eventually, she said, eyes following Nora's skipping path across the yard. "She writes like it's a contract with the universe." She kinda did. Maris arched an eyebrow. "She told me," he went on, "that if I didn't come back, she'd ask someone else. Said she'd learned not everyone leaves forever." Her breath hitched, only slightly. Then she nodded, once turned toward the porch and called, "You better not be using all the good nails," a chorus of voices shouted back. Rhett chuckled under his breath. Maris didn't look at him. She walked ahead, shoulders no longer hunched beneath invisible weight mug, empty in her hand. Sunlight touched the roof as she climbed the steps, slow, firm, as if the house itself was welcoming her home. The room smelled faintly of pine and worn flannel. A single lamp on the dresser cast soft light across the floorboards, catching on a tilted frame near the mirror. Maris sat on the bed, knees tucked beneath her, the sheets still warm from her daughter's small body. The house held quiet, broken only by the ticking of the baseboard heater. Wind slid gently through the last scraps of snow. Almost without thinking, she reached for the frame. Her thumb skimmed the glass, leaving a smudge across her father's uniform. In the photo, he stood in a barren field, one hand on the shoulder of a younger soldier whose name she never learned. His grin stopped short of his eyes. Something shifted behind the frame. Tilting it, she saw a folded page slide free. Edges, yellowed, corners curled. She didn't remember putting it there. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the letter. Her father's handwriting met her precise, exact ink, fading, but still legible. "Marimo, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get the timing right. I never have. You always forgave me too easily for that. You're going to be fine even if you don't believe it yet. Not because you're tough, because you know how to keep going when it's ugly, boring, or hopeless. That's rarer than courage. Love the kid like she's the whole sky. And when you're tired, sit. Let someone else keep watch once in a while. You've earned it more than you'll admit." Her chest tightened. She pressed the page to her lips and held it there. Years ago, she had lain on this same mattress with a baby monitor, crackling one sock, always missing the fridge close to empty. She'd lost her job the week the divorce papers cleared. Spent Christmas on the sofa with a can of soup and a stack of bills. Through it all, she convinced herself survival was the same as living. That loneliness was the tax she paid for peace. Tonight didn't feel like peace, not exactly. The faucet still dripped. Paint peeled on one wall. 3 boxes waited in the garage. The car's tires were nearly bald. But something had shifted, quietly without spectacle. She folded the letter again, slower this time, and slid it back behind the frame. The door creaked. Nora padded in, wearing dinosaur pajamas, a blanket draped like a cape. "I thought you were asleep," Maris whispered. "I was. I forgot to tell you something." Without waiting, Nora climbed onto the bed and leaned against her mother's arm. "I think you smile more now," she said, as if confessing a secret. Maris blinked. "That's what I forgot." Maris tucked a loose strand of hair behind her daughter's ear. Nora's skin was warm, her breath steady with the edge of sleep. Maris let the quiet rest between them. Then, almost without thinking, she said, "Maybe I'm just not so tired anymore." Nora didn't answer. She only curled closer, hand resting at her mother's side thumb, twitching in a half-dream. The heater ticked. Somewhere nearby, a branch cracked beneath the weight of melting snow. Maris stared at the ceiling, then let her eyes drop to the floor where her work boots sat side by side, mud drying along the soles. She should scrub them before morning. but not tonight. Her gaze drifted toward the window where stars hung low and sharp. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Probably nothing dramatic, no miracle, no sudden windfall. But she still had the roof. She had her daughter. And finally a measure of quiet that no longer pressed on her chest. She reached for the lamp and clicked it off, letting the dark fold around them like a blanket tucked by unseen hands. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a flat sheen on the laminate counter and the neat stacks of manila folders along the wall. The room smelled of old ink and lemon cleaner. Maris stood at the desk, palms damp, clutching her purse strap. A young notary adjusted her glasses, smiled politely, and slid a folder forward. Final copy. Just your signature on the last page, then the stamp makes it official. Maris looked down. Her name, Maris Elling, waited at the bottom, a thin line beneath it empty. The paper didn't weigh much yet. Her hand hovered before she reached for the pen. Beside her, the community attorney, a retired JAG officer and friend of Rhett's, nodded once. Calm, steady, with just enough iron in his tone to make bureaucrats blink. He had walked her through every clause, checked each section twice. Still, her fingers trembled as the ink touched the page. She drew a breath and signed. No applause, no music, but her chest loosened like a knot had finally come undone. The notary aligned the sheet, pressed the heavy stamp down, and a dull thud echoed. "That's it," she said softly. "You're the property holder now. Congratulations, Ms. Elling." Maris nodded. Her mouth didn't quite curve upward, but something inside her eased. She tucked the folder beneath her arm and walked toward the glass door. The attorney held it open, sunlight spilling across the rug. On the way out, he spoke almost casually. "You heard about Frick." She stayed silent. "They're looking into his files. More than just yours. Word is he's stepping down early." Maris didn't slow her stride. "That doesn't change much for me," she said. But the sharp edge in her voice had softened, not from surrender, but relief. Outside, midday light blinked through the trees. She wasn't wearing her heavy coat for once. A thin cardigan was enough. The air was crisp, not cruel. On impulse, she turned right instead of driving straight home. 15 minutes later, her tires rolled over gravel at the edge of the elementary school lot. Parents lingered with coffee cups, checking watches. Children darted across the playground. Red scarves streamed behind them. Sneakers scattered dust and laughter. Maris scanned the yard, then spotted navy blue crouched near the slide. Nora looked up, saw her mother at the fence, and sprinted. Maris stepped forward just as her daughter's arms wrapped around her waist. "You're early. I had something to take care of." Nora leaned back, squinting. "Are you finished now? I think I am. Can we get ice cream on the way home?" Maris tilted her head. "Isn't it too cold for ice cream?" "Not if we eat it in the car." Hard to argue with that. She tousled her daughter's hair, brushed stray strands from her face. Their shadows shifted together as they turned toward the car. The street gleamed in sunlight not seen for weeks. Even the windshield caught the glow as Maris unlocked the doors. From the driver's seat, she glanced back at the schoolyard. Leaves skittered across the walk, chased by a breeze that no longer bit. She opened the glove box, slid the signed deed in, and shut it gently. Then she started the engine. There would still be bills, long nights, repairs, weeks where the balance tilted too close to breaking. But the house was hers. Legally, finally. And the girl in the back seat, with muddy knees and a laugh, warmed by sunlight, had a place to keep growing. The ground gave slightly underfoot thaw, still softening the soil as Maris crossed the patchy grass. Morning light poured golden through the thin branches, glinting on dust lifted by rakes and shovels. From a small speaker, a strand of jazz played low-keeping rhythm with the scrape of metal on earth. The park, once abandoned, cluttered with beer cans and sagging swings, was changing. Maris felt it in the air, a hum of quiet purpose. She dropped to her knees beside a half-dug flower bed where a pair of neighborhood kids were burying small pots of lavender. Nora stood nearby with a spray bottle, diligently misting each sprig like a scientist tending her lab. "Not too much," Maris called gently. Nora nodded, lips pursed, eyes serious. A few yards away, a group of bikers, some in leather vests, others already out of gear, were repairing the crooked fence at the edge of the park. One of them balanced on a stepladder, hammering fresh slats into place. Another was painting over old graffiti with long, even strokes. And scattered between them were townspeople, some familiar, some not, dragging bags of mulch, brushing dirt from benches, nodding politely in shared rhythm. No speeches, no fanfare. Just people working side by side. It hadn't started as anyone's idea. Not officially. Just a passing conversation on the day the fence at Maris's house had been rebuilt. A comment from one of the older bikers about how the park used to be worth visiting. Then a neighbor added something. Then another. By the time she realized what was happening, someone had ordered a truckload of soil and borrowed tools from the church shed. And she'd shown up. Not because anyone asked. Because this time she wanted to. Maris stood brushing grit from her jeans. Her eyes landed on a small wooden sign propped against a tree stump. The original name of the park, Linden Square, had been stenciled back on in crisp white paint, the wood freshly sanded and sealed. At its base sat a pair of slightly worn gardening gloves. Tan suede fingers creased. On top of them, folded in half, was a piece of lined notepad paper. She recognized the handwriting immediately. "Don't forget your hands can build good things too." Our Maris blinked. The sun angled in behind her, softening the edges of everything. "Hey, Nora," called, running up. "Look what I found." Maris turned. Nora held out the gloves. "Someone left these." Maris nodded. "Yeah, I saw. They're big. Want to try them?" Nora shrugged, then tugged one glove on. Her fingers barely reached halfway down. She flexed her hand, making the material crumple. "Too big," she laughed, flinging one off. "Feels like I'm wearing a tent." Maris crouched again, taking the gloves and slipping them into her pocket. She paused, watching Nora sprint off to the pile of wildflower seeds another volunteer had started handing out. For a moment, she simply stood there. No tension in her shoulders. No lists running through her mind. Just warmth. In the distance, a truck engine coughed to life, someone heading home for lunch. A man whistled as he gathered up empty sacks. A few birds called out from the nearby trees, early spring harmonies bouncing off old brick walls and newly cleaned swings. She looked down at her hands, dirt under the nail skin rough from the work, and realized she didn't feel worn down. She felt here, a part of something, not rescued. Not rescued anyone. Just placed. She stepped toward the mulch pile, grabbed a fresh rake, and joined the others. Nobody clapped. Nobody noticed. But in the middle of the patchy field beneath the sun that finally hung without storm clouds, for company, Maris moved with quiet steadiness. Somewhere behind her, a child giggled. Someone else laughed. Her fingers tightened around the handle. Not to hold on, just to keep going. Sometimes the world doesn't break you with one big blow, but with slow, silent cold. And sometimes warmth returns not through grand gestures, but through a bowl of soup, a shared silence, or someone showing up when no one else did. Maris didn't need saving. She needed reminding that she mattered, that staying kind wasn't weakness, and that people, even strangers, can carry light. If this story moved you, follow the channel for more emotional stories like this one. Your next favorite might be just one play away.